If you walk into any health food store today, or even just scroll through your social media feed for 5 minutes, you are going to see it. It is sold in shiny glass bottles, packed into sweet gummy bears, and taken as a daily shot by celebrities and fitness influencers. Apple cider vinegar. It is marketed to us as a modern miracle, a cure-all elixir that can melt away fat, clear your skin, and fix your digestion. But behind all the modern marketing, behind the flashy labels and the bold health claims, lies a much deeper, much more fascinating story. The story of apple cider vinegar isn't actually about modern wellness at all. It is a story about human desperation, survival on the frontier, the brutal realities of early medicine, and a simple chemical reaction that kept our ancestors alive when they had absolutely nothing else to rely on. To truly understand how this sour, pungent liquid became the most famous folk medicine in human history, we have to forget about modern supermarkets. We have to travel back to the 18th and 19th centuries, to the early days of rural settlements and frontier living. Imagine living in a time before refrigeration, before antibiotics, and before you could simply drive to a pharmacy when you got sick. Life on the frontier was incredibly fragile. A small cut on your finger from chopping wood could lead to an infection that would kill you within a week. A failed crop meant your family would starve during the winter. In this harsh reality, professional doctors were a rare luxury. Most rural families couldn't afford them, and even if they could, the closest doctor might be a 3-day ride away. So, people had to become their own doctors. They had to rely on what they could grow, what they could forage, and what they could brew. And in North America and parts of Europe, there was one thing that grew better than almost anything else: apples. Apples were tough, resilient, and plentiful. But you couldn't just keep a pile of apples sitting around for months. They would rot. So, people crushed them. They pressed the juice to make cider. And this is where nature takes over, performing a brilliant piece of chemistry that would become the backbone of folk medicine. When you leave crushed apple juice exposed to the air, naturally occurring wild yeast begins to feast on the sugars inside the fruit. The yeast consumes the sugar and converts it into ethanol, giving you hard cider. But the process doesn't stop there. A very specific type of airborne bacteria, known as Acetobacter, invites itself to the fermentation party. These bacteria thrive on alcohol. They consume the ethanol and oxidize it, chemically transforming it into acetic acid, or CH_3COH. This simple chemical conversion from sugar to alcohol to acid is the exact mechanism that turned a basic fruit into a lifeline. The resulting liquid, apple cider vinegar, was highly acidic. And in a world with no iceboxes, acidity was magic. The low pH of the acetic acid created an environment where deadly bacteria and pathogens simply could not survive. Families began using this acidic liquid to pickle their vegetables and preserve their meats. It allowed them to store food for months on end, ensuring they wouldn't starve when the ground froze solid. But very quickly its use moved from the kitchen pantry to the medicine cabinet. Because early settlers saw that vinegar stopped meat from rotting, they logically assumed it could stop human flesh from rotting, too. If someone suffered a deep wound on the farm, they would immediately wash it out with strong apple cider vinegar. The intense burning sensation was seen as proof that the medicine was working. And surprisingly, they weren't entirely wrong. While it was nowhere near as effective as modern antiseptics, the acetic acid in the vinegar did disrupt the cellular membranes of harmful bacteria, mildly sanitizing the wound and giving the patient a slightly better chance of fighting off a deadly infection. It became the universal, undisputed king of folk remedies. People drank it mixed with water and honey to soothe sore throats. They used it to clean their homes, wiping down butcher blocks to keep flies and pests away. During outbreaks of cholera and scurvy, families would consume large amounts of it, desperately hoping it would shield them from the invisible diseases ravaging their towns. They didn't understand the science, they didn't know about pH levels or microbiology. But they knew it kept their food safe, and they knew it seemed to help their wounds heal. In a world full of terrifying, invisible threats, apple cider vinegar was something they could make with their own hands. It gave them a sense of control. But this golden age of folk medicine couldn't last forever. The world was changing, and science was waking up. As the 19th century rolled into the 20th century, humanity experienced the greatest medical revolution in history. Scientists like Louis Pasteur popularized the germ theory of disease, proving once and for all that illnesses were caused by microscopic pathogens, not bad air or unbalanced bodily humors. Then came the discovery of penicillin by Alexander Fleming, ushering in the era of modern antibiotics. Suddenly, doctors didn't need to guess anymore. They had actual, targeted, scientifically proven cures. Hospitals became sterile environments. Pharmacies filled up with synthesized, mass-produced drugs. And almost overnight, the old ways were looked down upon. Apple cider vinegar was rapidly pushed out of the medicine cabinet. To the newly educated, modern society, using vinegar to treat a wound or cure a cough seemed incredibly primitive. It smelled bad. It felt like a peasant's remedy. Why would you use crushed, fermented apples when you could take a clean, white pill prescribed by a man in a white coat? The medical community dismissed it entirely. ACV was stripped of its status as a life-saving medicine and banished back to the kitchen, relegated strictly to making salad dressings and tenderizing cheap cuts of meat. The era of the frontier pharmacy was dead, replaced by cold, clinical, hyper-efficient modern medicine. For decades, apple cider vinegar sat quietly in the back of the pantry, largely forgotten by the medical world. It seemed like the story would end there, a quirky historical footnote about how our ancestors survived before real medicine was invented. But history is funny. It moves in cycles. And human beings are complicated creatures. By the mid-20th century, the shiny veneer of modern medicine was starting to crack, and people were about to go looking for the very thing they had thrown away. By the 1950s, modern medicine had achieved miracles, but it was also becoming highly commercialized, cold, and incredibly expensive. People were starting to feel disconnected from their own health. There was a growing, quiet resentment toward the heavily synthesized, artificial direction the world was heading in. People were nostalgic for simpler times, for natural solutions that didn't require a prescription pad or a trip to a sterile hospital ward. All this simmering nostalgia needed was a spark. And in 1958, that spark arrived in the form of a small-town physician named Dr. D.C. Jarvis. Dr. Jarvis lived in rural Vermont, and he noticed something peculiar about the local farmers. Despite not having access to fancy city hospitals or the latest pharmaceutical drugs, these rugged rural workers lived incredibly long, healthy lives. Jarvis became obsessed with their traditional habits, and he documented everything in a book titled simply Folk Medicine. The absolute star of his book? You guessed it, apple cider vinegar. Jarvis claimed that mixing a couple of teaspoons of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar with honey and water was the ultimate secret to rural longevity. He wasn't marketing it to clean wounds anymore. He was marketing it as a daily internal tonic. He claimed it could cure arthritis, fix digestive issues, and bring the body's internal chemistry back into perfect alignment. The medical establishment laughed at him. They considered his book to be pure, unscientific nonsense. But the public? The public absolutely devoured it. Folk Medicine became a massive, runaway bestseller. It tapped into a deep psychological desire for a simple, natural, homemade cure. Jarvis inadvertently laid the foundational blueprint for the entire modern wellness industry. He took a forgotten pioneer preservative and rebranded it as a lifestyle choice. Fast forward to the dawn of the internet and social media, and that tiny spark turned into a raging wildfire. Suddenly, apple cider vinegar wasn't just a quirky Vermont remedy. It was a viral sensation. If you looked at the health blogs and glossy wellness magazines of the early 2000s, you would think this amber liquid was the holy grail of human health. The claims escalated to absurd heights. Influencers promised that taking a shot of ACV every morning would instantly melt away belly fat, completely detoxify your liver, and cure severe acne. Companies began filtering the harsh liquid, dehydrating it, and packing it into sweet, fruit-flavored gummies, completely removing the sharp, acidic bite that defined its entire historical existence. We had taken a harsh survival tool from the 18th century, stripped it of its context, and turned it into a candy supplement. The pendulum had swung from total medical dismissal to absolute, uncritical worship. But what happens when we strip away the frontier myths, ignore the influencer marketing, and put apple cider vinegar under the cold, hard lens of modern chemical analysis? Is it a miracle, or is it just expensive salad dressing? The truth, as it almost always does, lies somewhere in the fascinating middle. There is no ancient magic in the bottle, but there is some highly effective, genuine chemistry at play. When you consume raw apple cider vinegar, you are essentially drinking a diluted solution of acetic acid. While the wellness industry loves to hype up the mother, that cloudy web of cellulose and probiotics, as the source of its power, the heavy lifting inside your body is actually done by the acid itself. When you eat a carbohydrate-heavy meal, like a plate of pasta or a slice of bread, your body produces digestive enzymes, specifically one called alpha-amylase. This enzyme's entire job is to break down complex starches into simple sugars so they can be absorbed into your bloodstream. If you absorb these sugars all at once, you get a massive blood sugar spike, followed by a rapid, exhausting crash. But when acetic acid enters the digestive tract alongside those carbohydrates, it acts as a chemical disruptor. The acid mildly inhibits the function of alpha-amylase. Because the enzyme is temporarily blocked, the starches cannot be broken down into sugars as quickly. The digestion process slows down significantly. As a result, the sugar enters your bloodstream at a much slower, more controlled rate. Clinical studies have repeatedly shown that consuming a small amount of vinegar before a high-carbohydrate meal can significantly blunt the post-meal blood sugar spike. By stabilizing blood glucose, the body releases less insulin, which can lead to a prolonged feeling of fullness and a reduction in sudden sugar cravings. This is not magic. It is not a detoxifying cleanse. It is a straightforward, observable biochemical reaction. The acetic acid is literally changing the rate of enzymatic breakdown in your gut. This completely validates the samurai warriors who felt energized and the pioneers who felt sustained by it, even if they didn't understand the molecular biology behind it.